Because of my uber competitiveness, I feel like I have to be racing every day. I have to compete with people and I have to win. I feel like I have to win every day. And so, yeah, I ended up going to Cooper East, and this is in the depths of my despair. I'm talking. I just couldn't get this thought of suicide out of my head. Just like nonstop, and it even affecting my sleep. I wasn't sleeping at all, and I was too afraid to take any pills. I was against taking pills, and I've been wrestling with whether to take pills or not. Since college, I was open to taking them at first. And then they didn't help, at least the way that I expected. They were shit. And so I was like, fuck this. Why should I take something when it's not helping me? And I expect it to help me a lot. And a major issue I have is expectations. They tend to be too grand and too distant from reality. So, yeah, if there was a pill that helped that, then I'd be the first in line to take it. But there's not. And so I'm stuck with these issues, and I found solace knowing that how you deal with these issues is that's going to define you. How you react to the cards you've been dealt, because everyone gets a shitty card now and then. I feel like I have had plenty, and I'm not here to pity myself, but maybe a couple years ago I wouldn't have been able to release this, maybe too afraid. But now I feel like I've conquered it, so it's no big deal. I'm not afraid to put it out there, to share it. And this episode is turning out to be, it's kind of like the last 5 years of my life story, And while at Cooper Reese, things didn't get any better. Can you believe that? Putting in a lot of money, going away to Asheville, North Carolina. I released another podcast while I was there. Now we're getting into 2019, and these thoughts just would not go away. They kept persisting, and I continued to struggle with insomnia, and they would manifest themselves in many different ways. Fantasies of my funeral. I know that's one thought I had. Sometimes even homicidal thoughts. If anyone was getting in my way, if I felt anyone offended me, then I would think about axing them in my mind. But I'm overall a conscientious, well-meaning guy. These are just thoughts, and at the time, they meant a lot, but they really don't mean much anymore. And that's why I'm happy. Happier. I don't have everything together. I feel like there's still ways to go, but I'm realizing that there will always be expectations. Like, I'm never going to get to where I want to be. I think that's what you realize in your 30s. That, yeah, that's why people say, oh, you got to enjoy the journey, because that's really all there is. I don't think I've ever reached the finish line, unless that finish line is for small races, but I only think about big ones. I only think of fame and becoming the CEO, I think in, absolutes or ultimates, and it's affected me greatly, and so to continue with the story, I escaped Cooper Reese. I didn't feel like I could share. I tried to, but it maybe wasn't enough, and so I escaped. Got my car and I just drove off one morning without saying anything to anyone, and I never looked back. And that gave me short-term relief, but ultimately did not get those thoughts out of my head. What I really needed was something like Sierra Tucson, which is where I went in the late summer 2019 in August. And I will admit I may not have had these suicidal thoughts every day, because in 2019 I got a little bit of a break. At Sierra Tucson, I started to feel less alone. Other people, some successful people, some people who were like me, maybe who came from money and had a lot of expectations bestowed on them, just to see that they were struggling made me feel better. And yeah, and I had a great therapist, but unfortunately that was a vacation from the real world. I was only there for 3.5 weeks. It was like night and day. I love that place, but it's only 3.5 weeks. It was like a camp, you know? And so after that was over, I did start to feel better. And then I'd say maybe after about a week, those thoughts stopped. So there was a slight break. And then things did kind of improve from there. I found this place for, I think I almost felt like I had to label myself as a love and sex addict, because I had the thoughts all the time going through my head of this same girl, this one girl, this ex-girl from 2018. I was going through my mind. I didn't know what to do about it. And so that's why I went to Sierra Tucson. I was seeing maybe a sex therapist who deals with people with sex addiction. Do I have a sex addiction? No, because it's control. I can control it, but I definitely have obsessions and compulsions. I'll admit that. And that's kind of what led to me making these confessions. And later in the show, you'll see there are some sex stories. There are. But for now, I'll get into 2020. So I left Sierra Tucson and started to feel better. I actually came home to my mom's, where I'm living now. This is 3 years ago. And starting to feel better about myself. Starting to feel less alone with my problems, because my friends haven't had the same extent of issues that I have. I don't know anyone else who has. But then again, everyone's problems are personal. They are individual. They are isolated. So that's why it's so important to have self-compassion, because I like to say, it's such a cold world out there. You better be warm. Let's be warm. Let's make this cold place not as cold, because let's face it, it is cold as a motherfucker. It's a goddamn freezer in this bitch, So I went on to this place that was recommended to me, this place called Transcend, which was still an escape from the real world. And when I went there, it was a bit scary at first. New city, many, many states away, Houston, Texas, right? Scary, but also exciting, thrilling at the same time. And I felt conflicted about that place too, because I don't have this hard addiction, right? I don't have drug problems. I don't have alcohol problems. And that's what most of the residents there, 80-90% of the residents there had, but not me. So that made me feel lonelier. But at the same time, it was nice to see, there's still people. It was nice to live with other people. And I made some friends. No great friends, but I made some friends. Houston, Texas is it's kind of different. It's not extremely different, I'd say, than New Jersey, than the metropolitan, Philadelphia, New York metropolitan area. But I don't think they're polite, but I just don't think they're as intimate, I will say, down there. I didn't like that. In that there's even some people can come off as glib. I mean, they're polite and they're friendly on the street, but they're, in my opinion, kind of flaky. they don't have the passion or emotion that, the stereotypical New Yorker will have. Um, Southern hospitality, it's kind of fake, and so I ended up living and mistakenly, but there was something called the coronavirus that forced this decision out of me. I ended up staying in Houston for two more years. So I did start to feel better, and I felt so good about myself that I decided to stay in Houston, which I didn't know at the time was a bad idea. But I signed a lease for a year, starting in January 2020, not knowing what was going to come ahead. And sure enough, on the horizon, a month later, I hear about this something called the coronavirus that could be potentially fatal and a pandemic, but not quite hearing pandemic, maybe epidemic, because it was endemic in China, but it hadn't made its way to the United States. And to me, it was still a joke because I've never been affected too harshly from a virus, and all these other viruses, Zika and Ebola, they all stayed in their own home country. But little did I know, the timing was just awful. I signed a fucking 1-year lease, and then a month later, the country fucking shuts down. Or maybe 2 months, I guess in March, the country shuts down, and then in April, I have to return to Transcend because I'm having these thoughts and feelings again of loneliness. And so I return to Transcend for a month in April, but it was just a month. And that was a time when the thoughts started to come back. So I did get like maybe a 6-month break, end of 2019, beginning of 2020, when I didn't have suicidal thoughts every day, but they would still tug at me, they would pull at me. And then sure enough, I'm in a new city, just lost my job. I started a job as a security guard at like NRG Stadium, Toyota Center, all these major entertainment venues in Houston, only to lose it like 2-3 weeks later in March. I got it in like mid to late February, and then I lost it the first week of March, all because of this pandemic that I still wasn't taking seriously. And it took like a year, maybe 6 months to a year for me and maybe everyone else to take it seriously. And my mom maybe took it more seriously. She's a PA, so she studies viruses for a living. So she respected it a lot more than I did. And so, but I still started to really lose my shit as companies were saying no, people were saying no. It was just a aberration, a major one from reality, right? A new normal. And, I didn't like wearing the mask and being stuck. The worst thing was like being stuck in my apartment near downtown Houston. I guess I was delusional in that I was thinking downtown Houston would be more welcoming, warmer and more welcoming than it really was, and like more alive, more livelier. But it's shit compared to New York or Philly. Yeah, it doesn't compare, especially to New York. So, again, what I'm noticing here is me making these bad decisions, bad predictions that have really derailed me in life. And so that's why I'm here, is to try to correct those decisions and, decrease my confessions, right? Because, again, started to get lonelier in like mid 2020. April, May, things went downhill again, not really knowing what I was going to do. Picked up a job that really didn't suit me at all, but I found it anyway at a golf course. A typical 9 to 5 behind the desk at a pro shop with people. One guy who's kind of bossy who pissed me off. I believe his name is